迫る初夏地獄の軍団我らを狙う黒い影世界の平和を守るため Go! Go! Let's go! 輝くマシンライダージャンライダーキッ仮面ライダー仮面ライダーライダーライダー
So, yeah, the Garo franchise has been busy this year.
I participated in the Final Fantasy XIV Garo Armor event, and found it a surprisingly interesting game with how it differs from those who tried to follow the World of Warcraft model, and had an actual serviceable action combat system for once from Square Enix with a lot of customization options.
I'd say it still does, but then Stormblood happened.
Though you're pretty much stuck on story rails if you want to actually do anything. That or spend endless hours in the Palace of the Dead. I didn't have an issue with its story, and there's a good collection of likable characters in it.
Yugiri is best girl, horrible what happened to her voice actress. If you like MMOs, give it a shot.
Second, there was the Monster Hunter XX DLC that put Garo in there as collectible gear.
But I don't have the console for that, nor am I a Monster Hunter fan. Have fun if you do an R.
Chapter of the Black Wolf got an HD remaster, which redid all of its digital effects, and there wasn't much difference. Updating the effects didn't really change much about the story. Zero Dragonblood aired, and it was disappointing. If it weren't for a last-minute twist retroactively fixing my big problem with it, I'd otherwise think less of it, and was otherwise frustrated due to the lead woman of the series' dumb actions, dumb motivations, and bad romance with Rei. While I think it's low tier, it's worth watching for Rei Fujita, Mari Matsuyama, Yuria Haga, and Yuge Tomohisa, and there are a couple good filler episodes in there. Plus, it gave us man-on-dragon action. As God intended!
Somewhere out there, Seto Kaiba has been filled with an intense, overwhelming sense of envy.
Funimation imported and dubbed the second anime series The Crimson Moon and released it to home video. The Blu-ray's on my list to riff at the poor localization, and Chapter of the Black Wolf is hitting stateside this month, with its licensor Kraken trying to milk its distribution with doing it in 2 sets, for $40 each.
I'd say it's better than Funimation's exorbitant cost for its anime sets, but then I remember the Sentai DVDs have averaged $30 a pop after discounts, with 4 times the content per set. It seems expensive for what it is, and I think it should all have been just one set priced for $50 to $60. You're not distributing a franchise that established in the West. It would have been wiser to try to incentivize it a bit more for those not yet converts. Though, yeah, I put a pre-order down for it anyways.
And lastly, the next sequel event, Kami no Kiba for the Ryuga-era content, has been announced, reuniting most of the Makai Knights we'll be talking about this month with the antagonist of Goldstorm. While I'd like to see something for Raiga's era, I'm looking forward to this. Likewise, there was the announcement in September of Garo Vanishing Line also debuting this month. Has debuted this month? Which, like the Ryuga-era content, is set in an unspecified future, and I'm looking forward to that as well, even with the reputation the Garo anime series have had of being bad.
That brings us to Yami wa Terasu Mono, which translates as the one who shines in the darkness, and it's not considered a high point for this franchise.
A common complaint with Garo series is they've yet to be as good as the original. I don't really agree with that, as each of them have something of merit since the best moments of the franchise have almost nothing to do with the main story of each series.
Not so much this one, where I kept being told it was terrible, and I think why can be tied to 3 major issues and a tertiary factor, as once it gets going, it's honestly not bad.
First, Yami wa Terasu Mono was the first Garo series to not focus on Koga Saejima, as Ryosei Konishi had left the role after Sokoku no Maru. But the show is ultimately about the adventures of those who bear the Garo title and armor or their companions. So for another person to be the main character, they would need to wear the armor. But they can't wear the armor if Koga's still around. Killing Koga off for a new lead would piss everyone off, so it makes sense to time skip to a new period and another bearer.
But teething trouble came from this shift, and this series, and also Goldstorm, was declared their own separate canon by fans, because it was distaffed from everything done by the Saejima line and what had been established thus far. This preference coming from contradictions and stylistic divergences which would not be repeated after. And while I'm not averse to that idea, as it does feel like the staff were writing an entirely different show, it forgets a few things to assert this.
Now, seemingly due to my disastrous track record on obtaining correct information about this franchise, despite my efforts to present this all to the best of my ability, and the fact I avoid the Toku forums due to their users being batshit crazy, I'm going to admit straight out this is mostly my own speculation, since I haven't been able to track down where the everything's in a different timeline thing started. But going just by evidence in the franchise to date, one, a reiteration of my point about Garo being a show that follows the legacy of Garo. It undermines that for Garo series that have the armor and title held by a new bearer be completely unrelated to any other in timeline and continuity.
And yes, this applies to Hono no Kokuin and the Crimson Moon as well, even with their issues.
2. There are common elements which keep the setting consistent through most of the entries or give tells to when they happen. Technology in Ryuga's time is more advanced, which infers it's in the future.
Help that the live-action Garo shows keep themselves vaguely contemporary, so, by not pinning down a place in time, they're intended to be timeless.
And 3. Evidence in the franchise contradicts such an assertion. Not to be too spoilery, but Makai no Hana's Big Bad had time travel powers, but were shown to be limited to affecting only a singular timeline. In the series Makai Retsuden, this facilitated a team-up from Koga-era's Rekka and Ryuga-era's Rian. But because her powers do not work across divergent timelines, Rekka and Rian can't be from separate continuities. And it's not even a retconned it in later kind of thing, as it's made clear at the beginning of Yami wo Terasu Mono that it's in the future, just not how far.
So, yeah, I don't agree with the whole separate continuities assertion, and if you watched my show long enough, you know that I normally dislike anything trying to pull that cop-out as a defense for bad or contradictory writing in a successive franchise. I feel that era would be a better descriptive term for all of this.
Additionally, to own up to yet another thing I've gotten wrong about this, I've erroneously stated outside of video form that this entry was written by Yasuko Kobayashi. Yeah, my fault there. My original source for that was an article from back when I was still new to the franchise that stated she did, due to the similarities between this show and the anime Hono no Kokuin, which she is responsible for. And the misconception stuck until I actually got around to double-checking the credited listings for this review. As said, I have few credible sources of information about this franchise, and none prior to checking contradicted that.
And, yeah, that's not so. Yami wo Terasu Mono's head writer is Era Itaru, alongside input supplied by director Makoto Yokohama, and other writers being Hisaku Fujihara, Kei Takuchi, and Sumiko Umeda, who all have writing experience with Garo, so, yeah, kind of glad I've started the last few years to credit writers in these reviews, and that the wikis have since filled in those details. Thanks, guys!
Anyways, sticking with Garo's opening themes being half all instrumental, with the other one being the big jam project ballad, Yami wo Terasu Mono's first opening is a jazzy little tune that's honestly just bland and boring. The same can be said of the second opening, Touch and Go, Trigger of Crisis, which just reuses the same imagery of the first, and is equally as lacking in description of the show, just seeming like a bunch of strung together things instead of a cohesive melody, all set to a mixture of gold and black imagery reflective of the damaged state of the Garo armor, and how it's seeking to be mended.
It's not a good thing when you feel Jam Project, of all musicians, was phoning it in. I feel as if I just spoke sacrilege since Jam Project is god-tier J-Rock for series theme songs.
We open on a monologue of how, since the last series, Garo has been broken and corroded into a mostly black armor, and taken up by Ryuga Dogai, by just pulling the sword out of the ground.
The prior series strongly implied, and later confirmed by Makai no Hana, that there's a lot more behind being selected to wield a Makai armor than pulling a sword from a stone.
Distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
Though now that makes me wonder, would King Arthur have technically counted as a Makai knight in this setting? Arturia certainly seems to summon her armor out of nowhere. The series regularly contradicts this. Well, apparently Ryuga is a servant of Mephisto. Who else would hate marriage so much?
Yeah, no. As hilarious as that might be, this is Ryuga hunting a horror. Not that you would know this from how the first episode is cut, so our first impression, with Ryuga skipping entirely the expected standards to obtaining an armor, is more of him as a serial killer or sociopath if you're not in any ways familiar with the franchise.
Our hero, ladies and gentlemen.
Worse, he just drew massive amounts of attention to a secret holy order tasked with defeating manifestations of all the world's evils, with everyone else immediately believing he's a murderer. Thus, a massive manhunt begins, with Ryuga eventually being cornered by the future's take on military police.
You're kidding! God, I missed that show.
For the record, I'm not referring to the Special Guard of Vol City, where this is all taking place, as SG-1. Simply because every time they said that in the show, it only dredged up memories of 10 years, plus spin-offs, of science fiction sass and far better written characters.
Suffice it to say, that made this entry unintentionally hilarious as I could not take this paramilitary organization seriously. I mean, I know Stargate aired in Japan. Did they not see this coming?
Ryuga fights his way out of being captured, the cinematography of this not being very good, and I'll get back to the bigger show-wide issue it relates to later. In this instance, the camera is being either zoomed too far in or out, so the ongoing battle and escape aren't correctly captured in frame. Still, you can't help but feel this dumbass brought this all on himself, with Ryuga eventually being cornered one-on-one with the team's commander, Enho. She actually challenges Ryuga, forcing him to explain himself.
何が目的だ? 目的? どうせ理解できないって.
While he's not wrong, the arrogance he presents himself with is not endearing.
お前を連行する. 無理だね。俺は誰の指図も受けないから。
Then you are absolutely terrible at your job, as the orders sent to knights are for essential tasks made to most efficiently hunt horrors. If you are ignoring the orders of the Senate or anyone assigned to oversee your activities, then you are enabling eldritch abominations to eat people!
Now yes, Chapter of the Black Wolf is an example of how one should not blindly follow orders. But when the Cerberus trio weren't being spiteful or doing something to help revive Messiah, they otherwise did their jobs. More telling, that Zareba finally speaks up as Ryuga escapes. Yeah, he has Hironobu Kageyama in ring form too. And the Mado tool is in complete contempt towards his wielder, something not seen ever from him at all. Still, as Ryuga settles down, a holographic broadcast reports everything's perfect in this little utopia. And don't worry about all the missing persons reports. They're not missing as they never existed to begin with. And fascism and communism are nothing but red herrings. At this point, Ryuga flashes back to how he even came to this city.
And to be fair, had they opened the episode this way, I would not be railing on it like I am. I really feel they entirely messed up the character's first impression by Nolaning up the show and opening in media res. There's artistic stylization, and then there's not wanting to hate the main character. Especially since I'm already familiar with Ryuga from having watched Goldstorm.
But yeah, here's where we're shown and told of him coming to and sneaking into Vol City after being sent a missive to come here, having spent the last 5 years on his own, wandering districts as a free agent and slaying any horror he comes across. Like a dumbass instead of doing what knights have done and what's been shown to work for millennia. Vol City itself is an isolated city-state out in the wilderness. Totalitarian is law, but the people who get in, men are chosen to be horror food, seem to have a pretty good life. Though there's an oddity in the region, the city environment peppered with these odd angel statues which catch Ryuga's attention.
And this is not a detective noir show where you can pull that.
この街そのものを泣かしてる。
He catches sight of the bride from before with her bouquet, somehow sensing the horror's intent with esper powers that have never been part of this series' mythos before, and as night falls, confronting her. This re-showcases the earlier scene in far better context, more showing Ryuga's analytical abilities and spatial awareness, as you would expect from someone whose only noted ability is hitting someone with a sword. So he's not a complete novice, with him taking the bride out the window to prevent horror blood spilling anywhere else. Thus getting us...
You're kidding. That fight was so short, I didn't even need to worry about a fucking content ID claim to showcase it in full.
Oh. Well, that's dealt with. Now that we know Ryuga's side, maybe he isn't so bad a knight after all.
Useless ass psychic powers!
Yes, Ryuga's so bad at his job, he needs to be saved by... What even is that thing? This is a Lago, a magic sentient armor.
I presume it's some sort of successor to the Goryu, since this is the distant future.
That is the companion of Makai Priest Barai, head of the defense of this district, with the end of the episode also introducing fellow Makai Knights Takeru Jakuzure, that is a very hard to say last name, the Flaming Blade Knight Zen, played by Junya Ikeda, and Aguri Kusugami, the Heavenly Bow Knight Guy, played by Tsunenori Aoki.
いやまあ確かに派手だけど行けるとこまで派手に行くかでも俺は嫌いじゃないぜね
As they rip him for letting down his guard, though, Ryuga has some bigger issues to let out concerning Barai calling him here.
誰があんたのこと
目立ちすぎるそれで人知れず人々の命を守っているつもりか
ふざけるな
龍が我らと
No one talks like that!
And for that matter, in tandem with my points earlier about how he's refusing to do his frickin' job correctly, Ryuga doesn't look like the good guy here, but a petulant brat. Despite the scene trying to depict the others as arrogant, it fails entirely. As if there is a situation that needs three Makai Knights working together to solve it, it must be pretty damn near apocalyptic. You don't see him as being like Rei Suzumura, and how he's consumed with grief and a need for closure, so thus acted in contrast and rebellion to what's expected of a knight, which thematically is the arc they're trying to invoke for this character. But no, it has Ryuga, to conclude the first episode with him as a protagonist, acting like an immature child unworthy of wielding, or even passing the tests of character needed to even obtain that armor. And we've already seen two characters with Ryuga's conduct be denied Makai armors for acting just like this.
And thus, point 2. It's really hard to like anyone in this show, and character is a lot of what carries a series, as even good stories can be ruined by unlikable or mischaracterized casts.
Now it's clear they're invoking a character arc with this guy to develop him into someone worthy of wielding the armor and the title of Garo, the most prestigious Makai Knight. And from Goldstorm, he does eventually get there. And this distinguishes him from his contemporaries Koga and Raiga. Koga was a character with an overall emotional range tinged with sorrow. Raiga's main emotional state was serenity, and Ryuga in turn is more quantified with anger and tsundere tendencies.
However, and this same problem is repeated ad nauseum in Hono no Kokoin, from the outset of the series, he should not have been able to get the armor with his conduct and this characterization. They never really explain how he did either, just showcasing him drawing the Garo can from a stone slab, absent of the prior presumption that acquisition of the armor is tied to a trial of character. But this behavior keeps outright conflicting with the example set.
It probably doesn't help that Ryuga is playing opposite of Ryoma Sengoku and best 6th Ranger and Sentai fanboy Gai Ikari in this. Both Tsunenori Aoki and Junya Ikeda as actors instantly projecting charisma into their roles. while Wataru Kuriyama spends much of the show flat as a board and acting like a dumbass. So in one scene, the previously and soon-to-be Toei cast actors already have a stronger rapport with the audience than the main character that just spends an entire episode focused on him, and just from one scene at that.
I'd say this series was why Guy Ikari was sporting blonde hair in the Gokaiger cameo episodes of Zyuohger, but there was a 3-year difference between the two, and he didn't appear in Makai Resident to need the dye job. Maybe he just kept it like that. I know Masahiro Inoue did.
Oh, and yes, I find it a delicious actor illusion for him to spend this series wielding a scimitar.
Granted, the series spends most of its run turning Takeru into a punchline and taking the karma that should be going to Ryuga, which does not win points with me since I am against making a character into a butt monkey without, them having earned it.
At worst, Takeru is a womanizer, but any backlash from that is tied into his personal storyline and separate from the other crap that ends up happening, or is in far excess to his actual sin.
So, yeah, this series does not start off well with me, and it's probably the worst introductory episode we've had for Garo, outside of the anime. But it does go up from here.
As Dr. Prospect from Kamen Rider Eternal appears as what Akira Toriyama once described as the most evil of individuals. A real estate speculator, conning a businessman out of his building so he can turn it into a casino. How? As we are in turn introduced to Takeru's favorite pastime, sex with willing women.
Junya Ikeda gets all the girls.
Sexy lady, drive me crazy, drive me wild. All I heard was my baby's voice.
As he finishes up, he spots Ryuga outside being cornered by the SG, and rescues him on a motorcycle?
Show of hands, who wants Junya Ikeda in a Kamen Rider series?
They escape, and Ho curious on why Ryuga refused to attack her men, with Takeru then explaining how much of a paradise Vol City seems.
Well,
yeah, it's a horror all-you-can-eat buffet.
This exposition dump, however, is given just horribly. Not to help that several of the details are just one-lined, hand-wave statements, such as the entire city having been built on ancient ruins, and this fact in this one line used to explain away the entire climax of the series, without any other sign of its relevance.
で、その王様の兵隊が SG-1 ってわけか。
そう。
No. SG-1 explores other worlds and kills false gods. Have you not seen the series?
Eventually, though, Takeru asks what Ryuga's beef with Barai is, and frankly, knowing what it is petty, but not ungrounded.
As Ryuga's conduct? It's entirely Barai's fault.
Ryuga's training was for Barai to leave him isolated on an island and force him to fight against his Lago for 10 years. Ignoring that there are dedicated Makai Knight training schools and other resources made available to knights to teach them, and fighting well is not the beginning and end to being a knight. There's also apprenticing, the clarity of mind to lift a soul blade, other types of specialization a knight needs to master, and being taken out by a senior knight to face down a horror so one knows what they're in for.
And this is all made clear to us from preceding series. Do not even bring up Goldstorm, which had Ryuga team up with a Makai Knight, who spends his time running a school for knight trainees.
And then his graduation was Barai ordering him to kill the Lago that was his only companion for a decade, by getting him to draw the Garo Ken. And immediately after that, Barai told him his mom died, not long after Barai left him stranded there, and on a mission he was in charge of, with Barai thus taking the coward's way out of avoiding to tell him, and effectively abandoning him there. When the entire reason Ryuga trained all that time to become worthy of Garo was so as to play part in her wish to restore the armor that she had spent much of her life attempting to do. And now he's gained the armor, but it's still broken, and the one he's done it all for has long been lost to him.
Suffice it to say, Barai majorly fucked him up by preventing him from having any type of social interaction or chance to learn anything but survival and combat traits, which isn't even a fraction of the skills he should have. And the grudge Ryuga has with him is Barai is why he's forever lost the only family he's ever known, that he dreamed of every night since they parted in a wish to see them again. And he's completely right to think that.
The final episode of this entry shows us some of what Barai did in that time, taking the series' lead woman, Rian, after her father died in the same incident and trained her to be a priest. There was no reason Ryuga could not have stayed with him and Rian and still not done the exact same damn training. Hell, more in society would have given him more resources to become a better, more developed, well-balanced knight like literally every other one in existence.
And really, we'll all be calling Ryuga a dumbass throughout this review because he is in this entry. I'm not really going to tear the guy down, as there's a reason behind why he acts like he does, and he does eventually grow beyond it, which is in stark contrast to Toei, where every time they have an asinine jackass as their lead character, it's never justified and written off as just their quirky personality, and then they ignore holding them accountable for their asinine jackassery. While I'm irritated at it, Garo is still doing this much better than them storytelling-wise, by having karma at least come back to hit him over it every now and then.
But in part, I think that's why the Garo armor is still so damaged. Remember, thanks to Sakoku no Maru, we know that the knight armors are defined by an imagined perception of them and their wielder's own self, evolving as the situation needs to become the light of hope that shines in the darkness. From that perspective, the damage should have been mended upon being taken up by a new, worthy wielder, as the pristine image of self the armor would reflect would be restored. As it is not, it shows even the armor does not see Ryuga as worthy of being Garo, as not only does he have all this baggage, he hasn't had the chance to learn how to properly act in a way that is reflective of the ideal of the title. And as he's not a single person in the series actually acknowledges him as such.
Thus, its restoration as the series goes on becomes symbolic of him earning the right to don the real armor and bear the title. Granted, they say it's being caused by something else entirely within the framework of the storyline, but this subtext doesn't conflict with that.
Takeru finally convinces Ryuga to come to their base of operations, resulting in a confrontation with Barai, where he tosses Zareba back to him as the ring keeps rejecting him. Barai finally getting a chance to explain the situation, as the horror from before comes across fresh prey.
香りだ。
見つけた。
God damn, Augury! And now I'm kind of sad Duke didn't get more screen time.
Oh well, showtime, Rian!
You never see it come back. You see that my mind is too fast for right. You're done now. By the time it hit you, you're lost surprise.
I love the kind of woman that can kick my ass.
This is the aforementioned Rian, Barai's apprentice, and Rian is a badass. Her gun loaded with specially made enchanted ammo that banishes normal horrors. But this is not a normal horror.
And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to explain it now.
This is a Mado horror, which are created by inserting seeds of the horror entity Zedom into beings of strong will or moral character. The stronger the person, the more power the seed derives from them in their corruption into a full-blown high-tier horror.
This all contrasts against normal Inga horrors, which depend on gates to manifest, and then their hosts are all those who are of low moral character or in a moment of weakness. Usually the more despicable the person, the stronger the horror that results, or the more they retain their original persona. And this actually fits with the greater canon.
Look at Makai Senki Episode 8 with the time-displaced samurai Juzo.
And yes, same actor that's playing Barai. As I liked that episode, it was nice to see him again.
When the horror sword possessed Juzo, his force of personality suppressed the horror, so he was, for the most part, in control when he fought Rei. The Inga horror was weak in comparison to Chuzo's will and nobility, so was supplanted. But a Mado horror thrives on that strength to grow and develop, and as a result, are immune to normal means of banishment and tracking since everything the Makai Order made was to find and cut out the corrupt negative yang that allow Inga horrors to manifest. Mado horrors are homegrown abominations, and they have no idea how many are in the city. Rian and Agari back off, Ryuga, upon learning about the situation, trying his hand at it, as this is why Barai called him here, while the horror keeps wondering why these guys keep trying to kill him, even re-asking Ryuga that when he shows up.
Oh, another detail? Yeah, the human that became the horror, they are still themselves. Huh, and now I'm just having flashbacks to Time Force and Persona 5.
When Ryuga cuts him, waves of gold energy erupt from the Mado horror, Ryuga being forcibly given flashbacks of his dead mother, the Garo can absorbing the energy from each hit.
For he is the Kwisatz Haderach!
Ryuga eventually calls upon the armor, but every wave racks him with pain, finally collapsing as the horror dies, and the Garo armor momentarily restored to gold before the shine once again fades. From this experience, however, Ryuga decides to stick around and, grudgingly, listen to Barai, if only so his armor can be restored as, in a detail explained later on, he promised his mother to do so.
Now, something that's still a question left over by the show, why is it that only Garo can defeat the Mado horrors? They explicitly say this several times, and yet it's never explained.
Part of why it was so essential for Ryuga to come here is neither Agari's nor Takeru's armors can kill Mado horrors. And outside of Garo's damaged state or its pedigree, there's nothing fundamentally different about them. And by the priests having record of them, they know the Mado horrors exist and have knowledge and means of combating them that just aren't available, as the only means of creating them, Zedam seeds, are tightly controlled. While Ryuga absorbing that shine is part of the plotline to restore Garo, nothing amongst the later revelations in the series, as far as I understood it, would justify Garo, and Garo alone, being able to do that.
It feels like it deserved elaboration on, and yet that never came. There's a lot of moments like that in this entry.
Things move into more of a routine with the group as a woman strips naked.
Watch the series yourselves to see it, you perverts.
She is, of course, a trap.
Not like that!
And to the surprise of no one, this specific horror is the Achilles heel of our resident womanizer, being caught by it all while Rian and Agari set up charm spells across the district. Ryuga coming to try and talk with her and get to know her better.
あら、ストレートな告白は嫌いじゃないわよ。
Yeah, wait 2 years.
Though when Takeru's pulled into the horror's den, well, he's a womanizer, but he's not a fool.
They engage in a pretty impressive fights, which I can't show a single second of because they have the actress Yukiko Suo completely 100% naked, and if you squint you can make out her naughty bits. They actually caught flack for that and had to blur her lower body as, while topless shots are A-okay on Japanese TV at certain times, you can't show a man or woman's bare crotch. And they had her doing high kicks while fighting Takeru. For some, this counts as softcore porn, and it did absolutely nothing for me.
These women are actually the horror's limbs, which drag its victims into its den that's dimensionally phased so, as the others learn, they can't call their armor to them to fight it. Though through this, Agari seems more focused on his seals than being concerned about his teammates.
君たちには理解できない。
I'm planning to use others to invade an otherworld forest in an attempt to become a god.
Also, Agari, this plan of yours would go so much easier if you would actually explain what you're doing so your allies would be on the same page as you and not potentially get themselves killed.
あの程度のホラーに破れるくらいなら、ブライ方針に行って新しい騎士を呼んでもらった方がいい。
そんなことが可能なのか？
無理。できるわけないって。でも嫌な役目を上司に押し付けてきちゃったからね。私も一応ポーズをとって頑張っている素振りを見せておかないと。
I could honestly spend most of these reviews doing that. They kind of typecast Tsunenori for Gaim, as he pretty much played the same character, only Ryoma had more nuances to him.
Instead, Aguri is the blue Oni to Ryuga's red Oni, the overly calculative one with a superiority complex. I find myself irked by this, however, as with this series they really seem to be falling back on a number of overused character archetypes found in Japanese media. The world-traveled reckless idiot, the happy-go-lucky fun lover, the hedonistic and wily femme fatale, the overgruff commissioner, and the arrogant super genius. While Garo is usually more focused around event than character, I would never really say their casts are typical to generic archetypes, or especially more commonly seen ones. As the problem of doing that is often it's an excuse to not give them nuance if you can just fall back on expectation.
And they kind of do fall back on that with Aguri. He gets the absolute least spotlight over the series with, at most, 3 episodes even paying lip service to any personal arc. Takeru, as I said, gets a subplot, but Aguri, nothing. Why is he even here, as the show could have worked just as well with the power trio of Ryuga, Takeru, and Rian?
Hell, that might have worked to the show's benefit, as a knight that enjoys life to its fullest in the service to his duties would have been an excellent counterpoint against Ryuga, who seems to shirk anything that isn't slaying horrors. There's a serviceable arc there from 2 contrasting, but not openly antagonistic, personalities causing drama between them when it comes down to dealing with horrors.
Or, you could make him the show's butt monkey. That works too.
But Aguri, his only claim to fame is he's the only Makai knight in the franchise to not have a melee weapon, his being an archery bow which he uses to expertly kill this horror by reflecting moonlight into the horror's den, thus allowing him to armor up outside and snipe the horror inside its den, where the horror has been trapped because it's been operating for so long it's gorged itself beyond its ability to escape this facility. Thus, it's easily sniped once in range. That's badass, but his conduct leading up to that grates on me, and only further exasperates the issue of how dysfunctional this group is.
So, here's a question I didn't feel was explained by the show. How does Aguri actually kill horrors?
It's been established that horrors can only be killed by one of 2 ways. Soul blades, which destroy their forms and lock their essence away until it can be thrown back into the Makai realm, or special banishing spells which effectively do the same thing. While Aguri's arrows over the series are established to be normal arrows without such empowerment. They have no soul metal within them, as shown at the end of the series when Barai crafts for him an actual soul metal arrowhead. While it's possible that after armoring up, all of his arrows are endowed with the purifying flames that do work on horrors, backed up by how they look when he does that, over the series he kills or attempts to kill horrors several times with just his normal arrows without equipping his armor. Even them piercing barriers and gates in this horror's dimension space implies they have some special property, but that is then contradicted when later he needs to tie special charms on them to pierce the exact same type of barrier/dimension space magic. Is his weapon just energizing them with horror purification properties as implied by the glow they take on? Can the powers of soul metal that harms horrors be partially transferred? I really wish they'd said something about this, as the visual cue just, frankly, isn't enough for them to ground it.
This bugs me as it's something so easy to either explain or ignore. Had they never brought up that Aguri's arrows, or even his normal arrow tips, weren't soul metal or otherwise magic, we could have just assumed they were, and there'd been no problem. But since they do eventually bring up that they're not, it's another lingering question about how things in this setting even work. Garo doesn't spoon-feed you the answers normally, but usually they're far better at setup details like this.
Ryuga's shown on the run from SG again, which is still his own damn fault for even bringing them down on him, with this segueing to then following Enho after work. Her having a relationship with one of her subordinates, Yoshitomi, that today she just chooses to shrug off, instead by happenstance coming across Rian being, well, Rian, and kicking the asses of some guys in a bar. Rian buys Enho a drink in thanks for the help, the two starting up a conversation that lasts deep into the night, and sparks a friendship between them, which is regularly readdressed as the series goes on. Elsewhere, however, a horror manifests from a radio, taking off before Ryuga can arrive to kill it.
Useless ass psychic powers!
The next day, the SG has a briefing on Tosei Kaneshiro, the illegitimate son, conceived in an affair, of the city's founder and their collective boss, Kensui Kaneshiro, who they believe has a grudge against his father due to his black sheep status and is behind some recent incidents in the town. Granted, all of those incidents are actually horror-based, as shown with Ryuga repeatedly trying and failing to track down the horror from the previous night.
And this is why it's important to respect Zareba or your local priest, because they have the abilities to track them.
Rian detects it near the steakhouse that Tosei runs, just as Enho arrives to shake down...
Gah! Mirror monster! Or mirror world duplicate!
To be fair, this isn't the first time Kanji Suda, who played Daisuke Okubo in Kamen Rider Ryuki, has been in Garo. He also played Rekka's dad. Though, as Enho attempts to interrogate him, it's made obvious something else has stopped in for a bite.
Also, this scene has some absolutely excellent cinematography, as they keep the camera in the perspective of the horror. It really helped sell the unnaturalness of their viewpoint and the wrongness of the situation. And for once in this entry actually gave it a creepy atmosphere, which is otherwise mostly absent from Yami or Terasu Mono.
Enho and Tosei witness it kill another customer, both of them freaking out.
You know, just once I'd like to meet an alien menace that wasn't immune to bullets.
And despite Ryuga interceding, the horror nonetheless escapes.
I knew it! Country music is the work of the devil!
The pair, however, are left in a state of lingering shock from this revelation of the supernatural, and her reminiscing back on several of the statements made in her encounters with Ryuga, and connecting the dots to the things she just saw eat another man. Both trying to convince themselves it was nothing but a dream, only for neither to be able to lie to themselves like that. Well, in the face of existential crisis, booze me up, Scotty! From this, Enho begins to have nightmares of her eating people in the same way that horror did, freaking out as the dreams appear to follow her back into reality, a blue goo dripping from her lips, and the statue outside watching her intently.
If those things turn out to be whipping angels, I'm out of here.
The next day, Ryuga approaches Enho, in hopes that this experience would allow her to back off from chasing him, as he tries to clarify that he only hunts people that are no longer human, and otherwise have them stay out of it. But Enho can't. She might be part of a private army, but she joined it with intent to help people, and that included protecting them from what goes bump in the night. Though as Ryuga escapes, she once again sees that his words are not empty, as he never harms a single soldier sent after him, and as a result, it's bit by bit earning her trust.
This and the following episode are actually really good as they do something the series hadn't done yet. Look at this from the perspective of the civilians who get caught up in the supernatural.
And the exploration of Enho's revelation to this darker side of her reality is really engaging, especially since she does serve as a secondary cast member bridging the side of the world the Makai Knights live in with the rest of the world in a way far deeper than I ever felt I got with Kaoru. Chapter of the Black Wolf, as time went on, more seemed to drag Kaoru into Koga's world, since Kaoru's artistic profession was often one step removed from reality to begin with. As a military police officer, though, Enho has seen humanity at its worst, so it's not that far a stretch for her to accept the rabbit hole may go even deeper. And it helps that Enho's actress, Hiroko Sato, is a very strong performer, so you get a lot out of little with her in her building of the rivalrous relation with Ryuga and the one of bar-hopping camaraderie with Rian.
And yet, it doesn't last.